Now, you may not initially like what I'm about to say, but depression is a choice. Depression is absolutely a choice, and so is happiness. Now, the reason I can confidently say this is because I suffered from very severe depression and was very close to ending it for a period of 2 years. And I overcame that mostly through meditation. And it was through meditation that I discovered how much of that depression was entirely in my control. The problem was, I was not in my own control. Now, when I say that depression is a choice, well, of course it is, because what is depression? It is a series of crippling negative thoughts that control us, which we are unable to ignore. And of course, until you finally ignore those thoughts and realize it's all up there, you will remain that way for a very long time. And most people suffer from depression for years and years and years. And they take all these pills, all these remedies, and all this bullshit with no actual results. But I have been happy for many years now, and very happy for that matter. And that's because I realized my depression was a choice. Therefore, to obtain happiness, I must make a choice to feel happiness and experience happiness and be happy. Now, what is depression and what is happiness? These are thoughts inside our brain. In fact, every emotional state we feel is not necessarily real to the fullest extent. We almost feel a sensation that comes from a mental stimulation up in there. And depression is arguably the worst of them all because it cripples us to the core. And in many cases, from my own experience as well, it drives you to a point where you are unable to pick the clothes up off the floor. You can barely bring yourself to brush your teeth. Everything you look at, you just see in a negative light. You hate yourself. You don't want to get out of bed. You certainly don't want to do the bed. It completely contaminates us and it poisons us to the core and cripples us to the point we cannot physically do much and live in a constant state of feeling sorry for ourselves. And this is exactly the state I was in for 2 years straight. And I finally decided one day I'm just going to meditate. And it was during that meditation that I struggled for over an hour to find peace. And I didn't find peace immediately. Now, I want to do an individual video on meditation because there's, again, so much I can talk about on that because it's something I do on a frequent basis, which allows me to stay in the best form I physically can mentally. But you will notice and understand the true meaning of the fact depression is a choice when you meditate, or if you simply spend some time alone with your thoughts. Now, it wasn't until I meditated and I closed my eyes and laid there in silence for an hour that I became conscious of the thoughts in my brain. And I didn't ever know until that moment how many thoughts at random in the hundreds are constantly firing and yo yoing and swinging and batting me left, right, center that were all theoretically fabricated. Now, I did not control those thoughts, but simultaneously, I did not control the influx of those thoughts, and I allowed those thoughts to plague me and pollute me mentally and form a cloud of judgment that wasn't actually true. It was fake. My brain was telling me I'm depressed. Your brain is telling you you're depressed, but you're not actually depressed. You see, the way the brain and body actually works is your dominating thoughts, if continuously that specific thought dominates, will convince you that is your true state or the nature of your reality is what your brain is telling you. And to simply put, if your dominant thoughts are negative, you will perceive yourself and the world around you as negative. Your brain does not necessarily know the difference between right or wrong in many circumstances. It will consume everything it is fed. It is like a fat, hungry pig that loves a KFC boneless banquet. And I say that because I love a KFC boneless banquet. But the brain is a sponge. It consumes and consumes and consumes whatever it is fed, and it will swallow it whole. And whilst it may not always spit it out, The subconscious brain will keep it stored deep within its belly, and occasionally it will start to throw up once it's been fed enough of that same type of food. And the brain is susceptible. It is a absorbing mechanism where everything you feed it and everything you allow to go inside your brain, and the brain will eventually convince itself that what it's being fed is real. This goes for positive thoughts and this goes for negative thoughts. And when you can understand that all of those depressive, negative thoughts you get, worry, fear, self doubt, anything it may be that is negative in nature, your brain has been fed those thoughts. You have allowed those thoughts to enter your brain. And you've allowed so much of it to come in that your brain has convinced itself it's real. And now it's convinced you, as a byproduct, that it's real and that is the nature of your reality. At the core of it, all of our thoughts and our feelings are emotions. And these thoughts that we think are never necessarily true. But when the brain is fed so much, imagine the brain as a washing machine, as a matter of fact. Every item of clothing you put in is going into the washing machine. And when you turn the washing machine on, the only difference with the brain is it's theoretically always on. So the washing machine is always spinning. And when you turn it on and it starts to spin, everything gets thrown around together and the door is kept shut. Your brain on the opposing side has a door that's wide open. So everything you throw inside your brain and allow your brain to consume, it is consistently turning it around, almost like a turbo tumble dry. And eventually, with enough speed and enough items filling it up, it will start to throw out the items. And in this particular instance, those items will be positive or negative thoughts. If you sit here right now, and I'm doing this in particular for anyone that has had depression, take a moment to breathe. Take a moment to sit there in silence and examine those thoughts. And you will quickly realize you are not choosing to actually have these thoughts. These thoughts are coming out of nowhere. If you sit there and allow the brain in silence, you will realize you are not able to sit there in silence because there are so many thoughts circulating at random, completely out of your control. If you have that and you experience that, you are currently losing the war against your mind, and you have allowed the mind to roam free with the thoughts it's been fed, the incorrect thoughts. You are not actually depressed. You have convinced yourself, and the brain has convinced you that you are depressed. But you're not. You're completely fine, and there's nothing wrong with you. In fact, all you need to do is reconfigure the system and go in for a factory reset. Now, I didn't realize this again until meditation took place because I quickly realized for the first try for 1 hour, I could not obtain peace. And this is where a lot of people go wrong. They try to lay there with their thoughts for an hour and get very quickly overwhelmed. They cannot obtain a state of peace and go, fuck this, I'm done. This isn't for me. But actually, the first step to identifying depression is to realize how depression operates and what your mind is doing and how your mind operates in order to understand how to reconfigure the system and go in for the factory reset. So, using my example of when I first meditated for an hour, I realized in that moment I wasn't in control here, and my brain was entirely in control of me. It had consumed me to the point I could not think. And there were times I couldn't bring myself to even go to the toilet or go to the shower because I just wanted to basically die. There's nothing else you want to do in that state besides really just end the misery once and for all. But then I started to realize the problems I was not even creating in my head, that my brain was creating, were not real problems, but I was treating them as gospel. And the enlightening moment, and one of the most liberating moments, is once you lay there in silence for 30 minutes to an hour and do not aim to think. In fact, do not think, because your brain will give you the illusion of thinking for you. And when you are able to sit there in silence and become conscious of the thoughts that come to your mind in that depressive state, you will start to realize how crazy the brain actually is. And it will enlighten you to the point where you realize just how chaotic your brain is on a day to day basis. So, using the example of depression, if you are laying there in silence, you will suddenly start to go, hold on a minute, this random thought of self doubt has come in. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, another thought of fear comes in, or another thought will just call you pathetic. You're calling yourself pathetic. And when you realize that, you're basically under attack because the brain has not been controlled and hasn't been shackled. So the brain is running free like a wild animal. And over time, often by the third or fourth session, if you stick to it, you will eventually reach a state of mind where you finally obtain peace. And once you have reached the point where you can lay there in silence long enough that the thoughts start to slow down, I promise you the depression will very quickly begin to fade. Because depression is nothing more than an onslaught of wild thoughts and negative emotions that you have allowed to enter inside and pollute the system. And with silence and stillness, the mind begins to calm down. And very quickly, those thoughts begin to diminish. Meditation and even just silence. And the truth is, if you're in a depressive state, most of the time you are alone in silence anyway. So use that to your advantage to understand what is truly causing your problems and what is truly causing that lack of motivation, the depressive thoughts, the self hatred, the self doubt, the fear of this, the fear of that, and the fucking laziness, the horrible laziness that comes with it. That's just one of the tools to use. What you can also begin to do is not push yourself or force it, but a simple light walk and slow and steady progression to doing something in a very slow and steady manner will slowly help you understand that a lot of the problems you're facing are completely mental. Now, using a very common example of not having motivation to fold your clothes or brush your teeth or clean your room or do whatever it may be or do your bed. If you think about it in reality, how tedious is it in reality to do those tasks? It's nothing. It's a normal part and should be of day to day life. Yet the brain can convince you in that state that you are not capable of doing something as simple as brushing your teeth or doing your bed or tying your shoelaces. You reach a point where you are so defeated, you have convinced yourself that you cannot do anything. And often, the best way to do it is to get the fuck up and just do it. Because that's the first step to conquering your own inner demons, which have convinced you you cannot do anything. But in terms of conquering the true root source, there is nothing better than becoming one with your own mind again. If the mind is not controlled, the mind will control you. That is the reality of how our brains work. And depression is nothing more than a weakness and a lack of control that allows those thoughts to consume you. Now, once you have achieved a state of mind through meditation or simple silence with yourself, and those thoughts begin to diminish, and I promise you they will, because once you have meditated enough and with enough meditation, which will take several attempts and you must stick with it, the thoughts will begin to diminish. Your mind will begin to become quiet. This is the factory reset process. To factory reset the mind, you must engage in meditation to eradicate and remove the thoughts. This wipes the slate clean and provides an empty canvas for the brain to be repainted. At this moment, you must begin to fill the brain with positively charged thoughts. And one of the best things to do in that moment is very small forms of gratitude. Look around and start to appreciate with that reset mind and that empty brain, almost like unclogging a drain or a sponge. You know, when you clean a sponge and you squeeze it and all the dirt comes out? That is essentially what meditation is, because the brain is a sponge. And if you take a sponge and dump it and squeeze it into a dirty puddle full of shit, the brain will absorb the dirt and the shit and will basically represent it until it's dunked back in, almost like a baptism or a christening. It's dunked in and cleansed. The holy water is meditation in this particular instance. Now, positively charged thoughts in the form of gratitude is very simple in the grand scheme of things. And you must look around you and suddenly realize that a lot of the time you're depressed over nothing when there is actually so much to be grateful for. Where are you depressed? In a bedroom? In a house? In a home? With heating? Water? Electrics? No doubt the latest iPhone that you're doom scrolling on TikTok? You have more than a majority of the world, as a matter of fact. But you had a hot shower at some point when you did decide to shower. Do you have clothes? Do you have a family? Most likely. There is always something to be grateful for. And when you start to train the brain to express gratitude for the things that you are taking for granted, you will quickly begin to diminish those thoughts. And I find that gratitude is one of the greatest ways to solve that issue rapidly. Absolutely rapidly. You essentially replenish and restock the brain once you've eradicated the negative thoughts. And truthfully, you won't completely eradicate them, but you have allowed the brain to come back to a stable form where it no longer fires off those thoughts continuously in a whirlwind and tornado. So once you've now understood how the brain operates, which is it will begin to circulate everything it's fed, you continuously feed it even the smallest form of gratitude. And before you know it, the brain, like a washing machine, will tumble dry that around. And before you know it, the very same thoughts that were polluting you and telling you you're worthless and you can't be bothered and you can't do this will begin to relay what it's been fed. And this is how you essentially factory reset the brain into beating depression. Now, there is much more to this, but this is just one video I want to cover on the topic. And because I've experienced this myself, I am absolutely qualified to tell you this because I overcame this with simple forms of practices like this. The first step to curing depression is understanding that it's fake and fabricated, and you are absolutely in control and capable of defeating it. It may have temporarily defeated you, but I can assure you the only person who can cure this problem and solve the problem and defeat depression is you. And the first step to doing that is understanding what's causing it in the first place and how to press the factory reset button. And that comes through silence and meditation and gratitude.